All right, the woman said it's recording. Here we are on The Blind Man in Black. I'm Brian Snyder, and thank you for watching on YouTube and listening on Apple Podcasts. And if you like my wife and I being totally exhausting, go to the Exhausting Snyders on TikTok. So I'm here with my wife and co-host Rachel Snyder. She is the former editor-in-chief of Atlas Obscura, co-founder of Odd Salon San Francisco. She's a death positive advocate, writer. She's currently the founder of Posy Filled Pockets, and she's writing a screenplay about her father's band, Absalon. And she's anything death. Rachel can talk about, and she's going to talk about a lot of death stuff in a few minutes here. But I'd also like to introduce our guest, Gustavo Esteva, deprofessionalized intellectual, activist, author, and my dear friend. Thank you for being here, Gustavo.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Rachel. Good to be with you.
It's wonderful to have you. So we're going to start out, Rachel, death.
Death.
So let's talk about the logistical part of dying, all that stuff.
Well, as you know, I am a huge advocate for preparing for your own death. And like most people, I was not worried about my own until I got a cancer diagnosis. And then all of a sudden it became very important to know what was going to happen to me and to my things and to my children and all that. So the day, I think it was the actual day that I got my cancer diagnosis, I drew up papers for my advance directive. And if anyone is not familiar with what a healthcare advance directive is a legal document that spells out what kind of care that you want. So if you do not want to be resuscitated, if you don't want to be fed artificially, if you want to be kept on comfort care, if you want to be at home, just all that kind of stuff. And it also, most importantly, chooses an agent for you. So there'll be one person who is in charge of all that, of making sure that all that happens. And then a second person, a second proxy to take over should that person not be able to do it. A lot of misconceptions about advance directive is that it is a will. That means that as soon as it's signed, that person that you've chosen as your proxy is allowed to do whatever they want. And that's not the case at all. Everything in your advance directive, which can be super simple or extremely complicated, that's already set in stone. All that your proxy does is advocates to make sure that it happens and complains to someone if it doesn't, if that makes sense. They can't change anything. They can't decide. They're not making your decisions for you. They are making sure that your decisions are followed through with, if they can. In America, there's some gray area legally on resuscitation and letting someone die naturally. And it can get dicey. The hospitals are very, very protected legally. And if they are, say if it is their religious view to not allow someone to die naturally, they won't, and they don't have to, and that can be overridden legally. But for the most part, if you're really vigilant about it and you have the right paperwork in order and you know how to advocate, you can protect yourself or your loved one from that. That has nothing to do with property. That's only about your own healthcare. And it also follows into your what happens to you when you die, whether you're cremated or buried, and where your remains go and all that stuff.
What about, I was thinking the name Terry Schiavo came up.
Mm-hmm.
What was her situation? I don't remember. I remember this was an end of life situation.
Well, it was, something had happened. I don't remember what, but she was in a vegetative state. So she was not dying. She just was not, she was brain dead, or at least mostly brain dead. And they really have a hard time knowing how much is in there when that happens. You know, they can look at brain waves, but they have no idea how much consciousness somebody has. Her husband wanted it to be over and didn't want her to suffer anymore. So he wanted to pull her life support. And with the life support, she would have continued to live for many years. So that was the question was, should he be allowed to remove her life support as her next of kin and end her suffering in his mind? Or is that murder? Is he murdering someone because she's living? And as you know, I had a similar situation with my father in the sense that he was declining rapidly and he was on life support, which he did not want to be on. His advance directive was not followed through with by the hospital for religious reasons. And he very much wanted me to remove the life support, but he was going to be able to survive off of it for another good 3 years or so. So I was faced with the decision to pull his ventilator or not. It was not a hard decision in the sense that I knew what he wanted me to do. So that was easy. And he was asking me constantly, but
Didn't he want you to put a pillow over his head?
no, he had all kinds of very dramatic ways to let me know that he didn't want to be here anymore. He was like, and yeah, he was very clear, but we had already talked about it, and we'd already done paperwork. I already knew exactly what, how he felt about it. But he kept changing his mind because we all have an instinct to live, we all want to live. And he knew that he could live a little longer, but he just didn't want to live like that. So he was constantly asking them to pull it and then taking it back. And so he was not being decisive about it. And so they took away his rights to make the decision, gave it to me. They declared him incompetent, which he may have done intentionally so that I would have to be the one to make that decision, because I don't think he could. He was having trouble deciding it. So anyway, the point is that, I imagined in the past myself in that situation where I have to pull the plug on somebody that I love. I did not imagine that person would be conscious and talking to me, and asking me to do it. I didn't think I'd have to go sign the papers and go, okay, we're all done. We're doing it tomorrow. I assumed that any time that would be the case would be when someone was not conscious. And so that was a good example of, how that system works within the hospital and why it's so important to have someone you trust as your proxy, because if he didn't have someone advocating for him, he wouldn't have a say. It wouldn't be up to him. So that's
now,
awful. But
hold
that
on
was important to have this paperwork.
Hey Siri, set a timer for 1 hour. The other thing is, it's interesting because the end of life stuff, like the Jack Kevorkian issue is really controversial because I know disability advocates are against it mainly because our healthcare system is so bad, and living in a state of poverty, it doesn't give people with disabilities much of a choice. You know what I mean? In terms of if they don't have a quality of life and they're in poverty, they don't have the money to sustain themselves medically. So that's an interesting perspective as well.
It's one of those situations where if we were more advanced socially and emotionally as a culture, these wouldn't be so hard, but they are hard because we still don't treat disabled people like they should. We tell them that, oh, I'd rather die than be like you. I mean, if we still have that attitude.
I know, I hear it all the time.
We can, not from me. But if we still have that attitude running an undercurrent in our society, then we can't go around killing people. So it's hard. It's a dicey area, because as you know, I'm a big advocate of being able to choose, if you're terminally ill, to not have any sort of interference with your death. But you and I went on that radio show, and I for the first time heard that perspective of it from the disability community's perspective, and that made me question some of my beliefs about it, in the sense that, like, ooh, maybe we're not entirely ready for that type of freedom to do that if we are going to use it for evil. So but either way, it's important to know what you want and have it written down, and have someone else in charge of that to make sure that happens, because you're not going to be able to advocate for yourself when you're sick. It's too hard, and you're on drugs, and you're confused, and and you're sick. So
I'm on drugs and confused right now. So
well, that's why we need to do your advance directive. We really do.
Well, speaking of that, everybody who's listening and watching, we're going to get to talking about Dia de los Muertos. But so hang in there. But first, Rachel, let's go through the process. If I think I'm dying and I come to you as a funeral counselor, what is the process? Can you kind of do an overview?
Sure. Well, first I say I'm very sorry that you're in this situation. Mm-hmm. And then I say, what do you have in mind? And sometimes people know, and sometimes they don't. And so, that just comes out to asking the difficult questions. Well, how do you feel about this? So the advanced directive stuff, as far as what someone wants during their care, as a funeral counselor, that's not my department. That's between them and their loved one that they're putting in charge of that. But the disposition of the body is where I would come in, and that's where I would, want to know, did they want to be cremated or buried? And if so, where do they want who's in charge and who wants to take the remains home, or where do you want to be buried? And just set all that up ahead of time. And, I can't really help anybody make those decisions. That's up to them, and I can't sway them either way. So I just kind of, well, what feels worse to you in your stomach when you think about it? What makes you feel, and what makes you feel, huh? And just follow your gut. Something I said over and over again in the funeral home was, what is your gut telling you is the right decision? Because it's different for everyone. So
yeah, it was interesting because we were watching 6 Feet Under yesterday, not in preparation, but just because. And there was a scene where Michael C. Hall's character, who's a mortician, was basically doing a sales pitch for a casket, and it was like he basically was describing it as a luxury car.
This is like a vessel. Think of it as a vessel, a $9,000 vessel. Yeah. And I had a reaction to it because I was like, that's the idea of what funeral homes are like. And they are, a lot of them, but that's not the type of funeral. I was always downselling. I was just saying, you don't have to have that. You don't need to do that. You can do this yourself. So it's been said that my generation of funeral workers is doing their best to dismantle the industry from inside, because we're all doing that. We know it's too expensive, and we know how much the markups are. So we're letting people know. We're not trying to sway them on what they want, but we're letting them know what their options are, because that's been the biggest secret of the funeral home industry, is not telling people what they can do and just suggesting what they should do, which is disingenuous.
Yeah, and it sucks because there's so many people in poverty, and then having to deal with the death of a loved one, and then not have the money to pay for funeral services is horrible. Like, you're grieving, and then you're like, how do I come up with minimum like $1,700 or something like that?
And then literally within 72 hours, you were expected to pay in our area at the minimum $1,800. Yeah, is the average.
Right. So
the bare minimum.
There's no social safety net for anybody dying. There's no, there really isn't. There are like some minimal resource.
We have a county program here that helps with indigents, but you have to be indigent. You can't just be poor. You have to have nothing, and your family has to have nothing. Because they'll go after every family member down the line until they find someone who has something.
So it's like a bookie. It's like they do a shakedown.
Yeah. Well, and what I would do if someone obviously was struggling financially is I would give them, this is the bare minimum that you can do, and you can do this to save this here and here and here. And if it was still just overwhelming, I'd suggest fundraising, or they didn't like, my bosses didn't like me doing this, but sometimes it was the only way, is just how much do you have? And then the rest will work out. And sometimes they would pay the rest in payments, but a lot of times they wouldn't. We'd never hear from them again. And we assume that, that we're going to take a loss on that if they don't have it. So just try to get as much as you can of it up front, and then say, okay, well, we'll work out the rest. And my funeral home, my boss was very good about, as long as you stay in contact with us, we will not be aggressive. We will not aggressively chase you. Like, just call and say, I still don't have it. Just keep in touch. And as long as you do that, we are not going to worry about it. And that attitude did get us paid a lot more, I think, than being aggressive and threatening legal action and stuff like that. But funeral homes eat a lot because of that, because here's a little secret. They can't keep the body if you don't pay. That's illegal. So they still have to perform all the services and give you back your loved one. They can't hold someone hostage for an unpaid bill. So if someone
and they can't keep people on ice until they pay.
No. No one wants to do that. No. And that brings me back to the advanced directive thing, which is, if you have more than one next of kin, like you have 5 adult children, or you have 6 siblings, and you all have equal rights, just automatically, and you haven't chosen someone to be in charge, they're going to fight. They're going to fight about it. And that's going to leave everything in limbo. And I have had to, at times, call families and be like, look, your brother has been in our cooler for 3 months, and that is unethical. You need to make a decision. Someone has to decide who's in charge, and we don't care who pays. We need to cremate him now. Like, this is gross, and it's taking up space, and there's everything about it is not okay. And I've had to have that very difficult conversation with families who are fighting over who makes the decisions, or who gets to keep the ashes, or whatever the situation is. But that's another really important reason to pick your people, so that there's no infighting at all.
Can you go over just briefly kind of a bullet point list of things to keep in mind when doing advanced directives and getting prepared to go into the mortuary to discuss funeral services?
Well, first of all, do your research about the funeral homes, look at the ratings. There's always going to be bad ratings because it's a business where not everyone's happy no matter what you do. But kind of get a feel for the funeral homes and choose one carefully.
And you're going in at the worst possible time in one's life.
Yeah, when people come in when they're terminally ill and they're ready to do their entrance, they are not happy. Yeah, they're very scared. And so, but that's a funeral counselor's job, is to, make them feel comfortable. And for me, a big deal is not rushing people. My boss liked to get in and out. She's like, 25 minutes is my new record. I took my time, and I'd let them take their time. If they needed a minute alone, I'd remove myself, or I'd ask, do you want to take a break? And I just let them take their time. But, go in with someone else, make sure that you have someone with you so that you have some support, and write down a list of questions to ask before when you're not upset, so that you don't forget, because otherwise you will. And any good funeral counselor will sit and answer every single question you have. And if they don't have an answer, they will go find it for you. But make sure that you have that list ahead of time. And the things that you're going to be asked is, the advanced directive part, the health part, you have to work out yourself, which is, do you want artificial life? Do you want to be put on a ventilator? Do you want a feeding tube? Do you want all that intervention? Do you want drug intervention? Or do you just want everything to be natural? That's a hard decision, and people have to kind of work that on their own. With me, in the funeral home, all I want to know is, do you want to be cremated or buried? Who do I speak to about all that? Who's in charge of that? And where do you want to be after that's all over? Do you want to go home? Are you going home in an urn? Are you going to a cemetery? Which one? And get that all.
And then there's the religious aspects of it as well.
I had a family once that the mother had passed away, and they were Catholic, I believe. But two of the children, the adult children, had a completely different memory of a funeral they had been at, where cremated remains were, thrown into the wind or whatever. And one of them said, I heard mom say, I never want that to happen to me. I'd be terrified of that. And the other one remembered her saying the opposite. So and there was no agent. So they had completely opposite memories of the same moment where the mother said what she wanted, but they couldn't decide which one she had actually said. So they just sat in limbo for a good week trying to sort out. And it was well-meaning. It wasn't a fight over power. It was a fight over, no, I'm pretty sure she did not want to be cremated. No, I'm positive she said she did. And so it was very distressing for the family to not know. She had expressed a huge fear of one or the other, but they just didn't know which one. So trying to decide was very difficult.
And this morning I was playing you that Louis C.K. bit about his mom, how he was like saying like, and I apologize for those listening and watching about Louis C.K., whatever you think about him, but the joke is funny. He was talking about his mother asking his mother. He was saying, well, I didn't ask her when she died what she wanted. he said, Ma, fuck. And then no, he was saying that he asked her what she wanted, and she said she just want to be burned. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like with the leaves in the yard? What? And then he's like, and then she said that this was her last choice as a consumer, was to go online and with her credit card and go to the Boston crematorium and sign up for cremation. And
sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it.
Oh, I was going to say, so, and that's another thing is that you can do all this without having to pay first. You can pay, and a lot of funeral homes will push you to pay first, because then it's all locked in. And the benefit of that is that if their prices changes, yours don't. So if you've bought a pre-need for X amount, and then 5 years later you pass away and their prices are much higher, you still get this price over here. But other than that, there's no real benefit to it. So
it's like an insurance policy, right?
Yeah, it's an insurance policy. That's exactly what it is. But you know what else is an insurance policy? Sticking $2,000 in a book and putting it away and telling your agent where it is. You don't have to give it to anybody. So it is good to have the money set aside, because money is always an issue. But the most important thing is picking that person that'll be in charge. And I think now I learned this the hard way through my own experience. When you choose that person, it does not mean it is the person that is closest to you. People automatically want to go to their partner or to, but that's not who you want it to be, because should they have to advocate for you, should it be complicated, they're not going to have time to sit with you and be with you in those last weeks. If they're busy doing paperwork and fighting with the hospital and advocating for you, that you won't be with them. And so one of my bigger regrets is that I took on being my father's agent and spent the last month of his life fighting with the hospital and the administration, and him, bossing me around because he wanted things done. And I didn't get any quiet time with him to sit and just be with him. So I say, if you're going to choose somebody, you choose somebody who is that you trust, but it's okay if they're not at your bedside, and someone that is assertive and aggressive and will advocate for you, who will not be scared to, someone who understands the laws and will actually be able to do that for you.
Folks, that is Rachel Snyder. That's the person.
Sometimes it's me. It's been me many times, and mostly because I've done it, so I know what it means. But a lot of times someone will just pick somebody and they will say, "Okay, you're my person," and then they don't know what that means or what to do with that, and their personality isn't the type that they can go up against a hospital, because going up against a hospital legal team, I've done it. It is not fun. It is not easy. You have to be extremely aggressive and extremely knowledgeable and be ready to, face a big machine, basically.
Rage against the machine.
Your shy little partner who's, sweet and doesn't like authority. You have to pick someone who can do that job. And hopefully it won't be necessary, but sometimes it is. So
you have to find somebody that can rage against the machine.
Exactly.
Right.
And someone that you're willing to cut loose to do that, instead of holding your hand and feeding you ice chips or whatever.
Right.
And then in the funeral home, it's the same thing. If there's no advance directive that tells me who's in charge, and I have to, and so I have to figure out who it is, and often that person is not the right person. It is not someone who should be doing that, and they'll feel a duty to do it. So they'll be hard pressed to pass it on to someone who should, and so you end up dealing with someone who's not equipped to make these decisions, but is the person that just falls to. And then having to protect them from the rest of the family, who's often like, she can't do that. I should be in charge. I'm going to be in charge, and be like, well, legally you're not. So, and then have to kind of hold hands with that person and help them through a very difficult growing experience, at least. But yeah, I think it's vital. I think it's vital to get that, and to maybe give away your stuff when you get sick. Give away the stuff that you treasure the most to the people who you want to have it, instead of just leaving it for people to find. Clean up your stuff. Get rid of all the nonsense that you don't need. Make sure that you've downsized your life, because on top of the grief and on top of the money, there's also this mess to clean up. All these belongings that some people don't even know why do you have a jar full of bottle caps? Who knows? Maybe it's something very big to the person, but no one knows what it is. And it's a painful operation too, to go through someone's home and pick through their belongings. And so the more you do it ahead of time, the kinder it is to the ones you leave behind.
Yeah, I was thinking now, I've been avoiding doing my advance directive because I feel like I haven't lived enough. But still, I need to do that. So we need to sit down and do that.
If you get hit by a bus, it doesn't matter.
Which is very likely.
I mean, everyone should do it, because you don't have any idea what's going to happen. So if you get hit by a bus and you don't die, and you're in the hospital and you are not capable of making your own decisions, that's unfortunate. That's a problem. The thing that drove me to do mine immediately after I got my diagnosis is I was still married to someone I was separated from, and had been, who didn't like me at all, and no goodwill in toward me. So the idea of him being my next of kin and being the one who would make decisions for me if I were in a coma, that was terrifying. If you're married and you have not officially divorced, like completely officially divorced, and you haven't spoken to your husband in 15 years, he is still in charge of you if you don't do this paperwork. So if anything should convince people to do it, whether they're sick or not, it's that, think of who your legal next of kin is, the sister that you don't get along with, the toxic mother that you haven't spoken to in 10 years. That's who's in charge. So you want to pick somebody. Who are you going to pick, Brian Snyder?
So you were saying somebody that it shouldn't be like, because I would want you by my bedside. So I would probably choose my brother, I'm assuming.
I think that's a good choice.
I mean, so I think that would work.
Yeah.
So, but in any case, is there anything else we need to talk about before we conclude this segment right here on advanced directives and funerals, all the logistical stuff? And Gustavo, did you have anything to add about this portion?
Yes, I want. I want to add two things. I learned two things this morning. One is that hopefully Nicole and I will sign a document of the like Rachel suggested, that I think is very pertinent. And just in case Nicole and I die at the same time, that is something that can happen, and we really hope that that will happen that way, that we will die together, because we decide that, or because of an accident or whatever. But then in case both of us die together, if one of us die, the other will know perfectly well what to do. We know, we have discussed this many times, and then we know very well what to do. But if the two of us are died at the same time, then other people need to take decisions. And then we will put that in a very precise document, hopefully today, because really Rachel convinced me that it's very good to do.
Don't wait, you never know. Well, and I will tell you one more thing about that, Gustavo, is that at least in the US, we are not, I'm sure not there either. You don't cremate people together ever, unless they die together and they request it and it's in writing. So you can be cremated together if that is the occasion and you have it in writing. Otherwise, it's completely illegal to do for obvious reasons.
Well, the second point is that I will resist for us and for any person and for my people to resist the American way. It is very clear that we have a different way still in Mexico, even for rich people, even for middle class, and that it is not only at the level of the communities or the poor people. It is, we have a different tradition, a different culture, it give us a different feeling about that. And then, for example, let me say something. Perhaps I mentioned this in another conversation, but I was accompanying a friend, a neighbor, to the cemetery to bury his child. And then when coming out of the cemetery, a very old guy and one of the elders of my community embraced me and told me, Gustavo, perhaps you can consider reserving your place here in the cemetery. It was one decision of the elders and was one way of hosting me in San Pablo Etla. Because I went immediately to the municipio and buy my little piece of land in the cemetery. And then they knew that I will not leave San Pablo even dead. I live here really forever. And then that is, I have but that little piece, and that is the tradition, not cremation. It is right. Go, and if I know, if let's assume that Nicola and I died at the same time, and no one is in charge. No one in my family, my daughters and my son are not in Oaxaca. They cannot come immediately. And then no one is really in charge. The people will be in charge. They will bring a casket that can be very simple, and they will bring us to the cemetery without any problem. And they will cover any legal aspect involved or whatever without any problem. That is part of our tradition. And they will perhaps have a fiesta and a celebration, and they will be talking stories and celebrating our lives, not our dead, and sharing with us and expecting that they will come and talk with them later in the Day of the Dead. That will be a completely different story, not a lot of legal procedures. But let me now tell two stories that contradicts me in a very concrete sense. One is a Mexican story of a couple of poor people, very poor people, that brought their daughter, a young daughter, 19 years old, to the Social Security for a surgery. And after a very obvious, very evident medical mistake, she was declared brain dead. And the doctor, the Social Security, considered that it was the proper thing to do is to leave her to die instead of having them tubed and connected, etc. But the parents said no, because she's still alive.
Yeah.
And because there was an evident medical mistake, they were able to have the economic protection of the Social Security. And for more than 5 years, that girl was still alive. And the argument was, oh, she's still alive and we are doing this. And she reacts, she moves a little piece of the little finger and then she reacts when we say something. And then she's still alive, he's still feeling, she's still reacting. And they, for more than 5 years, they kept her alive. Even if it was evident that it was clearly brain dead, impossible to have any possibility of coming back. Anyway, that is one story. The other story is a story of very close friends in Paris, Jerome Bache, that suffered a lot in recent months because his mother was a person that fought for 50 years for a dignified life. She was one of the champions of trying to create change in the law and doing everything and talking. And she was very, very active in the struggle for dignified death. And then she was not able to die that way. And Jerome started to fight and had a lot of problems, legal problems, etc. And then she died in the worst possible condition against all her tradition, 50 years of struggle. And then she died in a very undignified way. And then, Brian, as you said, what we have now in the American way, in the modern way, is a combination of medicalization and business. The two are now one thing. They conspire to each other, with each other, and then it is horrible how it is organized in the worst possible way, and prevents really a dignified life. I will say something more about what Rachel said. Yes, we all have the will to live, but we also have the will to die. And there are people that can tell you that dying becomes a very serious need, a desperate need, that people really want to die and want to live, to express this will in the proper way, because not everyone master the art of dying as transforming that in a personal decision without any drug, as my story of my grandmother. These people, many people still know in my culture how to die when the moment comes. And they know, they prepare themselves, they prepare the loved ones, they tell the people, they say goodbye to everyone, etc. And without any drug, without any external intervention, they decide this is the day or this is the night, and they live peaceful this planet.
And for those listening and watching, if you want to hear Gustavo's story about his grandmother, you can listen to or watch the previous episode of The Art of Dying, and he explains that in detail.
Yeah, that is the point. I think Nicole and I are dreaming to come when, you know, we are in the 9th decade of our lives. Then we know that there are not many years ahead of us. And then we are thinking, we are dreaming of the possibility that at one point in a few years more, we have still some things that we want to do. And then after those years, we want to leave this planet in a peaceful way, in a dignified way. And hopefully we will be able to do that. But of course, we will sign the document because this can happen unexpectedly, just not because
Yeah.
our plans or dreams, but something happens. It is a kind of heart attack or whatever, because at our age, that is things that happen. And then because of that, or because of a boss or whatever, I think it is very convenient what Rachel is saying. Then yes, we will sign that and prepare a peaceful abandon of this planet. That can be easy in our context, as the Day of the Dead demonstrated at Dia de los Muertos just a few days ago. It is one very important celebration. In the case of Oaxaca, is the most important celebration, commemoration of the year. And there was a lot of rebellion these days. Because of COVID, the government established a lot of limitations for this. The people were not allowed to go to the cemeteries, and it was so important for the people to go to the cemeteries. If you go to a cemetery in the normal conditions in Mexico, it's not only in Oaxaca, particularly in Oaxaca, but not only in Oaxaca, it is a moment of celebration. The whole families come and clean the tomb and bring food and drinks and music. And it is a whole possibility of connecting again with the people that abandon this planet.
So you were not able to do a parade or anything, any of the usual celebration?
No, they were not allowed to go to the cemeteries, and even many other different kind of celebrations, commemorations of different kinds. In most villages, there was always a kind of parade, a kind of masquerade, and different kinds of representation. Last time you asked Brian about someone that you were here when it happened. It's a very interesting representation during the Day of the Dead. And then we were hosting at home 200 or 300 people, offering food and drinks to all this group of people coming to different houses of the village. That was a very important thing. It was a kind of a celebration and talking with the loved ones. When you have something that happened anyway, is that in every family they have an altar, and in that altar they put the photos of the loved ones that abandoned. They put the food, the drinks that they loved, and they had, many people have a very serious expectation that they will come during the night, and they need to know that the families hosting them still love them, still remember them, but that they become the conviction that they will come during the night, and then they should be hosted, should know that they are still appreciated and loved by the family. And that is a very serious conviction that has not been destroyed by modernity, by the presence of the American way of life. People staying in the US, living in the US, are still celebrating the Day of the Dead. We knew about people in California, people in Los Angeles, people in many places in the US were organizing their Day of the Dead.
I went to a wonderful Day of the Dead celebration in Los Angeles many years ago. That was just, I was doing this work, but only academically. I wasn't, in the funeral business yet. And it was very eye-opening and so much fun and so beautiful. The costumes and the altars were so gorgeous. It was in Hollywood Cemetery, I think is where they had it. But, it was such a very large Mexican population in that area. It was I'm a huge fan of it because, of course, the culture is the culture that I'm trying to push here. The idea of celebrating life as opposed to death. So it's just, as long as, I did an event recently about on Day Dead. I did one here, but it's a very fine line to make sure that we're not getting all our US all over it.
Appropriating culture.
Yeah. To make sure that we're honoring the actual traditions and the tone and everything. And I worked really hard to make sure it was not super well attended because it was because of COVID and everything else. But I had a good time with it, and I think I had some new people that had come in that weren't sure what we were doing, that I think left knowing a lot more and feeling more comfortable talking about death in general. And I wrote silly poems about everybody on my altar and gave it kind of a silly presentation.
I hate to go to the cases of middle-class families that are forced to be very serious, that no one can smile even. You need to be very serious and look very sad, even pretending to be sad, even if you are very happy because of the person died, you need to pretend that you are sad. I hate to go to this kind of cases.
Yeah, I did a lot of encouraging families to do the opposite of what they're expected to do. If they said something, well, what did he like? Well, he liked gambling. Poker night. What's wrong with that? Well, you can't do that. I said, of course you can. You can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. And there were some very interesting services that we held. but just the honor and the symbolism of the Day of the Dead is just beautiful to me. And I really, really appreciate that.
Rachel, do you have your poem accessible?
Not really. I don't know exactly. I mean, it's on my drive somewhere, but.
What I was going to say, if you had it, you could read it. But also, when I was in Oaxaca, in Teotitlan Teotitlan, it was so beautiful. It was a small cemetery. And the thing about it was seeing a cemetery, and it was lit up with candles were everywhere. And there was a mariachi band, and there were people like having full-on conversations with their loved ones who had died. And it was so warm. Like, think of it, you think of a cemetery, especially in American culture, is creepy and morbid and so on. But this was such a beautiful, warm, inviting environment, and it felt just enveloped with love and joy and the expression of everything that is what it is to be alive.
And that means that, for example, we were talking before about there are hundreds of names for dead, and there are a lot of popular sayings about the dead that represents both familiarity and laugh. It's not taken seriously dead. It's not a threat. It's not something terrible. It's not something. It's the only thing that we know for sure that will happen to every one of us. We have all the other things are uncertain. We don't know what will happen with us in the future. We don't know when we will die, but we know we will die. That is for sure. And then people should have this feeling of familiarity with this, and not to be afraid of this. But that is, again, I think we discussed also this. I have heard that the people is not afraid of dying, except when they are afraid of not having lived.
When they haven't lived, yes, that's what I hear the most. And my experience with the dying has always been that yeah, they do come to a place where they're ready and they've accepted it and they want to start that processing. But that's what hospice nurses here say all the time, is that the only people you see struggling with that too much is people who regret things that they haven't done, as opposed to things they have. They could have a million regrets about mistakes they made. It doesn't matter. It's the ones that didn't take that phone call, who didn't take that trip, who didn't take that job, who didn't accept that proposal. Those are the ones who struggle.
Or when the life had no meaning.
Yeah.
They were working and doing the right things to do, but without the meaning. When the life had no meaning, and they are expecting that something will happen that will give meaning to that stupid life they had. And,
yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. I mean, I've spent a long time up until really when I met Rachel. I spent a long time not living, and now that losing my eyesight made me realize that I have to live. I have to live fiercely, otherwise I may run out of time. And
the regret from not doing that has been hard for you to cope with, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of regret. And it's really only until I met you and we married and we have our little guy, when I really started living. And now I'm worried about dying. I think about it. I was even thinking yesterday, I was like, I was laying in bed and I was like, what if I'm dying right now? And
You
I
are.
was right. But I was thinking, what is this what it's like? And I was like, but that brings up something else that you mentioned in Posy Filled Pockets at that Dia de los Muertos event, about how the brain helps you with the transition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I should say, first of all, that this is just my theory. This is not any sort, there's no science that I'm aware of behind this. I mean, there's some, but
well, somebody at my work mentioned this as
I
well.
think there is a little science behind it, but yeah.
The white light and seeing all your loved ones and all that. Go ahead, talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, our brains are a very powerful organ that can make us think anything. I mean, we know that people who, have mental health issues the hallucinations, you can see something that's not there. You can feel something that isn't there. You can hear stuff that isn't there. I've had some experiences through my cancer situation when I was hallucinating from the medication stuff, where I thought an airplane was in my bathroom. I mean, I heard it was hurting my ears. It was so loud. I could feel my eardrums like about to burst, and it wasn't, there was nothing there. So when you keep that in mind, that your brain can tell you anything it wants, it can turn off pain, it can turn off your emotions, it can show you whatever it wants to show you. It makes sense that in the process of dying, your brain shows you whatever it is that's going to coax you away from this world and to go into the next one. It's going to show you your loved ones that are past, that you've been missing, that you can now go with. It's going to show you the heaven that you've been reading about your whole life in church. It's going to show you the green grassy meadow that is where you actually, think is the best place you ever want to be. It shows you exactly what you want and what you need to let go of this world. And otherwise, again, the brain is a very powerful thing. So otherwise it's a struggle. It's a deep struggle to let go if there's nothing coaxing you away. So that's my theory on the white light and all that stuff. And actually people start seeing their loved ones typically several weeks before they pass away.
My grandmother, I remember when she was 90 and she said to me, "Oh, 90's too old." And shortly around that same time period, she said, "I saw a man with the fedora in my doorway. I think it was my husband."
Yeah. My dad started seeing his cats about 2 months before he passed away. He'd go, "Rachel, the cats are here." I'd say, "They are?" He said, "There's one on my shoulders and then shadows on the cats are here." I'm like, "Well, that's okay." But, and then my auntie's on hospice right now. And I spent a lot of time with her a couple weeks ago. I went to spend time with her and get her paperwork in order and all that. And she was saying she was seeing my father and also her father. And every once in a while she'd say, "Wait, where's mom? Where's Bud?" She was asking for people who are already gone and where are they? And when she said she saw my father, I said, "Well, what's he doing?" She says, "He's just waiting." So, and she's still here, but everyone that I've been with in the last start seeing the people ahead of time. It's not in the moment. It's weeks earlier because they're preparing. They're preparing and their mind's going, "Oh, I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what happened." What's going to happen is you're going to see this person. Yay. It's okay. And I think that, that process starts way before the actual death process starts. It starts with the processing of your life. And
Gustavo, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, one of the things that you talk about, Rachel, because you've been with several people as they've transitioned.
Yeah.
And one of the things you talk about is the energy needed to die.
The spiritual, yeah. So people go inside. I mean, typically everybody's different, but generally speaking, people go inside themselves at a certain point. They stop interacting with the world, then they stop interacting with their families, and then eventually just they spend a lot of time sleeping. And that sleep time is important because that's when they're processing their life, and they need people freak out when terminally ill people stop eating and they want to feed them, but the body doesn't need food at a certain point anymore. It just needs to rest and to do whatever it's building up its energy for that final tradition, because being born is very traumatic. Dying is very traumatic in the sense that it's hard on the body. When your body's shutting down, that's an effort. It takes effort. And so typically people rest and they're sleeping and they're quiet and they disappear a little bit. They go inside themselves, very deep inside themselves, but very often, more often than not, sometimes subtly and sometimes not so subtly, there is a moment right before the death where they perk right up and they speak and they eat. Sometimes they engage and they have this burst of energy. And it's been said that is, the spiritual energy that they needed to pass over got there. It's here. They've built it up. It's there. And they have this one last moment of lucidity or energy or whatever. And sometimes it's very brief. Sometimes it's a couple hours, and then they go back and that's it. But that's an experience that many people have, that many people get freaked out by, is when they're with someone who's dying, who hasn't been responsive for weeks, who suddenly goes, "Hi, can I have a sandwich? What's going on?" And it weirds people out. But I mean, I like the idea of that being the energy that is finally there for them to carry them the rest of the way. And then we do get that one, if we're lucky, that one last moment, right when we need it, of that person being there and present. I mean, I got it when my father died, and it was important. I needed it. I didn't have a good goodbye with him otherwise. So for him to come out of his place he was and communicate with me in those last moments was very important for me. So,
and also talk about the music.
Oh, when my father died?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my father was a musician, and music was his whole life, and he had trained me to be one as well, but I ruined everything by becoming a writer instead. I didn't want to be a singer. And I felt I assumed that it would be comforting for him to hear me sing to him on his way out. So I had chosen 2 songs that were loving songs that he did not write, that were not, either one of our songs. And I sang them quietly to him. And I sang them to him while he was transitioning, while he was, he was obviously going somewhere. Now, in his moment of lucidity, I said, "I will be here. I am not leaving until you're gone. I promise I will be here until you're gone. I'm not going anywhere." And he was very relieved by that. He looked at wherever he was going, and he looked at me again, like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, I'm sure, or we'll be fine. I'll be here." And he said, "Okay." And then he started to, then he went away, but he was struggling. His eyes were flickering, and he was very agitated, and he was suffocating because the ventilator had been taken out. So he was he was struggling, and I was singing to him, and it was very awful, and it was taking forever. I was like, "How long does this take?" And because then I ran out of song, because I only had 2 planned, and it took about 10 minutes for him to pass completely. And he just kept looking at me, like trying to look at me, and I kept seeing him struggle to look at me. And when I ran out of songs, I panicked. I said, "Oh gosh, what? Oh, I know, hold on." And I went and I got my iPad, and I started to play a song by the Beach Boys that he had played over and over again over the past 6 months. And the minute I shut my mouth and put that music on that had nothing to do with us, his face went completely peaceful, and he was gone within seconds after that. And I realized that the mistake I had made, and this is how you learn stuff, is that I chose to do something that was keeping him attached to me. I was singing a song that meant something to both of us, and I was holding him here by putting that stimulus in his brain, by just, "I'm your daughter, I'm here, this is our connection. And he couldn't let go until I stopped doing that and put on something that meant something only to him. I put on a song that he loved, that had something to do with him and that he had been listening to, obviously connecting it to his own experience. And I just watched his face go, and within seconds he was gone. And that was a very valuable lesson to me, and a mistake I beat myself up for a lot. But I mean, I couldn't have known. But I realized in that moment, oh no, this is the wrong thing to do. I'm keeping him here. He doesn't want to leave me. I'm giving him the one thing that he can't disconnect from. I'm piling it on him. And it had the opposite effect of what I thought it would. So
What was that song?
The Beach Boys song?
Mhm.
It's called Summer's Gone, and it's about getting older and everyone's gone away, and it's summer's gone and winter's here. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song. Beach Boys were his favorite band for a long time, and he was a singer. And the the harmonies are just gorgeous. It's a gorgeous song, and it's a beautiful song to die to. Very beautiful song to die to. I made a good choice. He made a good choice. But he made the choice. He'd been playing it for months, so it was the first thing I thought of. But yeah, my voice was not comforting him at all. So
You irritated him till the end.
until the very, very end, I was annoying.
Brian, this is a good moment to say something. It is pretty obvious that Rachel has accumulated an incredible wisdom about dying, and to hear her, it's really, really very comforting, because this is interesting. It is not sad. This wisdom is not implied sadness, but it is a kind of joy. It's a way, it's clearly an expression that a good art of dying is a good art of living. It's for living well, for appreciating life. It's not for killing life, but celebrating life, but knowing how to go. That is another way of appreciating life, of respecting life. And this can be a kind of final connection with something that we will discuss hopefully in another conversation, that is about rage. Because today, particularly in the Day of the Dead in Mexico, I saw a lot of rage around me because of the decisions of the government. And this is accumulated rage that is also associated with COVID and all these kind of things of stupid instructions that we have been getting. And the people exploded in the case of the Day of the Dead. They started to see that how all this is absurd and against being human.
That was one thing that was too much, yeah, is to take away that right to.
Humans cannot be confined, cannot interrupt our interaction with others. We need to interact with others, and not only virtually, but in real, in presence, touching each other, seeing the smiles of the others, seeing us, interacting. And then because with the authorities canceled many aspects of the celebration of the Dia de los Muertos, then the people were full of rage. But here I will associate immediately how to express rage. And I can remember very well how the Zapatistas organized the fiesta, the festival of dignified rage. It is very important to have a dignified rage, meaning, first of all, not to imitate the people producing the rage. It's not to use violence as they are using violence, not to use oppression as they are using oppression. Trying to express in a dignified way your rage. And then you can transform your rage in action, but also in joy and activity and a kind of things that liberate you from the sadness, profound sadness that they are creating in all of us with their stupid decisions and with something that we need to acknowledge and we need to discuss. That is basically the kind of death that they are causing, the kind of undignified death they are causing. It is in places like Oaxaca, people were able to abandon hospitals because they started to say they are killing people in the hospitals. And it was literally true. They were killing people in the COVID hospitals because of the tragic situation of the health system. And then because they are creating the conditions for undignified death, the conditions for a horrible way of dying, and for killing people that should not die at this moment. Because of that, they are producing a lot of rage, but rage that is not killing them, that is not trying to just hate them in that seat, but to do something about this and to do something with joy. It is an expression of living, not not imitating them, not reproducing the conditions that produce our rage. But perhaps, Brian, we can open a conversation about this at another time.
So let's do that. The next discussion will be entirely on transforming rage into love. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, 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 of course. That will be very good.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing what is alive within each of you. And is there anything, let me ask you both a question. If you could play something as you were dying, a song, or listen to a poem or something, what would it be?
It would be my father's music for me, because he's not here. So, you know, it always brings me so much comfort now, you know, and I think it would bring me the ultimate comfort then, and also remind me that that's who I would be seeing.
What song though?
What song?
Yeah, if you had to listen to one.
Well, that's a little tougher. Probably the one that he, there's one that I sang at his memorial, or there's one that he wrote for me called Let Me Down Easy, that maybe it would be that one, because I have that recording, you know, of him saying that it was about me, and that I was the most inspirational girl he knew. He didn't know if that was a compliment. You know, that radio show clip I have of him, that reminds me of him the most. Or maybe I just have him singing, you know, what we played at the wedding. Unchained Melody. And Melody, just him singing it, because he had such a beautiful, beautiful voice.
Gustavo, do you have a song or a poem?
I know many popular songs that I loved in my time that will attach me to life. That will not be the songs that I want to hear in that moment. Mm-hmm. I can immediately imagine the kind of images that will come to my mind with those songs that were in moments of my life, particularly when I was very young, that I loved the conditions of those songs and how to hear those songs time and again. I can remember one night with some friends that we heard the same song something like 40 times. The same song. We were drunk, of course, but we wanted to hear it again and again and again and again. We could not escape from that song. No, I will choose, I love a few Bach cantatas, and particularly one, the Magnificat, that is really very joyful and it's very full of expression. Then I will want to hear that specific music. I know that even if it is very joyful, it is one way of saying goodbye.
What was the song?
Magnificat. Okay. It is not a song, it is a piece, it's a whole piece, it's a cantata by Bach.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you both very much. As always, this was a wonderful conversation. And is there anything anybody would like to say before we depart?
No. Gustavo, I'll send you my poem when I find it. I'll send you my Day of the Dead poem.
And see you soon next time.
And I'll send you my stand-up comedy set. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening on Apple Podcast and watching on YouTube. This is The Blind Man in Black. I am Brian Snyder, and we're here with my wife and co-host, Rachel Snyder. And if you like watching us being exhausting, go to TikTok and watch us on the Exhausting Snyders. And Gustavo Esteva, thank you so much for being here and spending time with us. And we will continue the conversation with transforming rage into love. All right, here's our awkward ending.